I was going to say there's not going to be a video this week, except obviously that is not the case. Hey everybody, Matt Colville here. I spent the weekend working on my Stronghold Rules, which people have been asking me about a lot, and if you don't know what I'm talking about, when my players get to be between 5th and 7th level, I give them the opportunity to build a stronghold. It's really just a style of play my friends and I have been participating in since the 80s. It goes back way before that. The stronghold gives them a base of operations, and it essentially represents their transitioning out of that era when they were just, rat catchers, just adventurers grubbing around in dungeons, and they're starting to affect the world a little bit more. They're starting to become a little bit more politically active. When the stronghold's done, they get to roll in a cool chart like this. This is the one of the charts I was working on this weekend. There's one for every class. And they get a cool special ability based on their class, and there's opportunities to improve their stronghold, but it's something that I've always done on a catch-as-catch-can basis. Like I said, this was a tradition going back many, many years, and as a result, I only worked on it when a player needed it. So I spent my weekend fleshing it out and making it like a real product that I could put on the DM's Guild. The flip side of that is I didn't have time to work on the video that I wanted to do this weekend, and I kind of gave up on making a video for this next week, but I thought at the last minute I was inspired and said, well, there is something I wanted to do that I think will be relatively short. But that remains to be seen. I always say that, right? I always say, this is going to be a short video, and then it ends up being like an hour long. Ever since I started this series, I knew I would eventually get around to talking about the adventures that I have run and talking about the things I liked about it and the stuff I did when I ran it that would be useful to a DM. If you've been following the series up till now, you will probably have a pretty good idea what adventures I want to talk about. Stuff like Red Hand of Doom, Against the Cult of the Reptile God. I have literally run dozens, if not a couple hundred adventures over the past 30 years, and you will get the benefit of all that knowledge. To start off the series, though, I wanted to talk about a special kind of dungeon that I don't think we get much anymore, and that's called the Funhouse Dungeon. I have a friend of mine who has kind of a love-hate relationship with D&D. She watches Critical Role, she's played D&D with me, and a lot of her nerd friends like it, but she has bounced off it several times, and I think that's because those of us who are playing now, including the folks in Critical Role who are kind of new at it, they are much more getting into character and speaking extemporaneously in character, which is something I am perfectly comfortable doing because I've been doing it for a long time, but I think for a lot of people, it takes years. It takes years of playing all the time before they are comfortable with the idea of playing someone who is different than themselves and getting used to the idea of extemporaneously imagining what their character would say at any given moment, which is what we call role-playing. Much more common is the murder hobo who just wants to kick down the door and murder stuff and get some treasure and level up and have a good time. In this day and age, I think that style of play is less popular than it ever has been. I think we all sort of imagine when we play D&D that we're going to get involved in an epic story. We've all seen Lord of the Rings and Game of Thrones, and we watch Critical Role, and so we have some idea of what kinds of stories D&D is about, but one of the things I like doing in my videos is saying that, listen, there are lots of different ways to play this game. There are many different traditions, I think all of which are still fun or valid, depending on what kind of stuff you like. In other words, there's nothing wrong with being a murder hobo if that's what you're into, and there is actually a kind of adventure that is perfect for that, and it's called the Funhouse Dungeon. Funhouse Dungeons are typically self-contained puzzle dungeons that don't make a lot of logical sense and are often fun and sometimes funny, sometimes deliberately funny. You can use a Funhouse Dungeon in the middle of your regular everyday campaign, but they tend to have a high body count, they don't make a lot of sense, there's a lot of fourth wall breaking. Funhouse Dungeons, especially the shorter ones, are a great way to spend an evening playing D&D, but not taking things too seriously. And I have played Funhouse Dungeons in the middle of a regular campaign, but it is somewhat of a shift in tone. It does require way more suspension of disbelief. Typically, these adventures have these crazy, insane wizards who built this gauntlet that you have to run, and it's something where if you accept the premise of it, everything's fine, but if you are playing a Funhouse Dungeon in the middle of a regular game, it can be somewhat unsatisfying to die because you jumped in the wrong pool of water or you stepped on the wrong square of the chessboard puzzle. It is pretty memorable, though, when you die to some crazy Rube Goldberg trap inside a Funhouse Dungeon. We'll cover a bunch of different Funhouse Dungeons, not all at once and not all in this video, but to start our adventure series, I thought I want to make a short video. What's better than White Plume Mountain, which is a really short adventure. You can get a PDF copy of this on the DM's Guild. I think it's like $5. It's a great introduction to the idea of a Funhouse Dungeon while at the same time being incredibly silly and weird. White Plume Mountain is a great place to start with the Funhouse Dungeon because it is incredibly short. I think the entire adventure is like 12 pages. Every time I pick up my actual copy of it, I think I must be missing a big chunk of it, but I'm not. It's really short. I'm not going to go into too much detail because I know a lot of the people that watch this series are players and not dungeon masters, but this is a video series for dungeon masters, so I'm going to do some advice, and there may be a couple of spoilers in here, we'll see. Hopefully not enough to ruin the experience for you. White Plume Mountain was written by a guy named Lawrence Schick, and he was applying for a job at TSR, and he sent them this adventure, which was essentially cobbled together all the puzzles he had ever used in his games into one big adventure. And to his surprise, they just said, hey, this is great, we're going to publish it, you're hired. And it went out sort of as is. And he expected them to like edit it or give him a chance to do another draft of it. So there's stuff in White Plume Mountain like Black Razor, which is one of the famous artifacts of D&D, along with stuff like Whelm and Wave, which are these, I think one of them was a trident, which are these classic artifact level weapons. Black Razor is quite obviously a ripoff of Elric's sword Stormbringer. Actually, it's a ripoff of that sword right there. That's a purely coincidence, by the way. White Plume Mountain begins in kind of a classic old school setup way, wherein these three powerful artifacts that were each owned by one of the different lords of Grayhawk has been stolen by some mysterious wizard named Caraptus. And each of the owners of these three items got a mysterious letter. You don't meet according to them, if you run the adventure as is, you never meet these lords who had their items stolen. The DM just tells you this is what happened. These lords have hired you to go to White Plume Mountain, which is a famous dungeon that this ancient wizard Caraptus built, and retrieve these three items. Caraptus, the wizard's taunting message to these three lords that he stole these weapons from, takes the form of a long poem that he wrote to them, which you are supposed to read to the players, and has a bunch of clues for what's going to happen inside the adventure. And that's a hallmark of the Funhouse Dungeon. It has a lot of puzzles, and puzzles are a part of D&D for a couple of reasons. One, obviously, they're a part of the literary tradition, stuff like The Hobbit has puzzles in it, but more specifically, as a design goal, a puzzle challenges the players, not their character. And that's a big part of the fun of D&D. Like, challenging your character is just a matter of numbers. If I raise the armor class of this bad guy, or I give him more hit points, or I give him a better attack roll, then I am challenging your character sheet. But if I put a puzzle in front of you, or a trap, or a mystery, now I'm challenging you, the player. And that is, for some people, including me, a lot more fun and engaging. I'll give you an example, and this is a legitimate spoiler, but hopefully one of the only ones in the adventure. One of the first things that happens in White Plume Mountain is you meet a Gynosphinx. Gynosphinx as opposed to Androsphinx, just like there's Gynoshep and Androshep. We do not say Femshep because that is sexist. And as you would expect, the Sphinx gives you a riddle. Round she is, yet flat as a board, altar of the lupine lords. Jewel in black velvet, pearl of the sea, unchanged but ever-changing, eternally. Not a very challenging riddle, pretty obvious, but it is one of the first things that happens in the adventure, and it sets the tone for the whole thing. You, the player, are going to be challenged. There are other big combat encounters. You do fight at one point a giant enemy crab. There's a frictionless floor at one point, and like a lot of advanced Dungeons & Dragons adventures, there are a lot of things where it just says there's a 30% chance this horrible thing happens to you if you're not taking some precaution, and that's not based on a stat check. You don't make a saving throw. It literally, as far as the adventure is concerned, the expectation is the Dungeon Master just rolls a percentile dice, and if he rolls above 70, something bad happens to you. And I actually still do that as a DM because I'm from that old tradition. I often still will play like Night Below or something like that, and I will legitimately just take whatever it says and continue to run it because I don't mind that kind of, there's a 25% chance this happens to you. There's a 5% chance you get turned into a gnome. That stuff and a lot of the content in White Plume Mountain will seem capricious, and it is. A Funhouse Dungeon is the kind of thing you run because you like that feeling that the world is weird. The world of Dungeons & Dragons can be very strange and alien and have capricious things in it. Remember, originally, there wasn't good and evil. There was only law and chaos, and a lot of Funhouse Dungeons are predicated on chaos. I have run White Plume Mountain. I ran it once because I thought it would be fun. I thought my players would get a kick out of it, and about half of them liked it, but the other half definitely didn't like it. They didn't like that feeling of taking a detour around the plot and the story that I had set up and spending time in an amusement park. I mean, it's not literally an amusement park. You understand what I'm saying? They didn't feel like they were advancing the plot, but there are ways to take something like White Plume Mountain and integrate it a little bit more. Not a lot. It is, after all, a crazy dungeon made by a mad wizard, but you can take those three lords who've had their items stolen, and you can change what items they had stolen from them to make them something a little bit more relevant to your campaign, or make those lords of Grayhawk lords of your setting that the players want to help, that the players are looking for aid from. And one of these lords says, well, I'll tell you what, I had this item stolen from me. If you can retrieve it, then I will give you the help you're looking for. That's an easy way to integrate it so the players, while they're on this crazy adventure, are thinking, all right, this is weird, but if we do this, then we get this thing we wanted. Like, for instance, if a player's dead and you're trying to get them resurrected, maybe one of the high-level NPCs in your world that can help them is a cleric who had one of his powerful artifacts stolen and gives the player a quest to go through White Plume Mountain and retrieve it. Now, when you get to the end of the adventure, you'll notice that I think the wizard Caraptus does something to take the items away from the players. They end up being attacked by a couple of Ifrit, which are probably too high level for them, and the actual adventure says, listen, if your players have had too hard a time of it, you don't have to do this. You can just let them go, let them keep the items. But there's also the opportunity in the text for some of the players to end up prisoners of White Plume Mountain forever, taking the place of some of the guardians of the dungeon. You get a sense based on my description that this is a kind of older, I would say late 60s, early 70s, sword and sorcery fantasy, more Conan-esque, where he's trying to get through the Tower of the Elephant and there's crazy stuff happening that doesn't make any sense to Conan or really the reader, and it's not meant to. It's meant to give the impression that in ancient times, right, all of Dungeons and Dragons, every D&D world is predicated on the notion that there was an older, more powerful empire that has collapsed, and its ruins are what you're picking through to get all this buried gold and artifacts. Somebody had to make these magic items, and so the notion that there's a powerful wizard who's now dead and his ghost haunts this place it's a classic trope in D&D. If your players are murder hobos and they just want to get together and blow off some steam and go through an interesting, intellectually challenging adventure without a lot of role playing and no pressure, something like White Plume Mountain is a lot of fun. It's just a question of context. It's just making sure that, roll up characters just for White Plume Mountain. That's a great way to spend an evening playing D&D. It's a great way to try your hand at dungeon mastering for the first time because there's no pressure. You tell the players, listen, we're going to go through a Funhouse Dungeon and the goal is to survive, come out the other end and maybe get some magic items. And if the players have a good time and you had a fun time running it, then you can keep playing D&D with those characters. Again, it's all about context. That's the first adventure episode, folks. We talked about White Plume Mountain. We'll talk about other adventures in other episodes, and we'll talk about other Funhouse Dungeons because I have been through and run a bunch of them. I've been through Expedition to the Barrier Peaks, which is sort of Funhousey. I've been through the Crypt of Lysandra the Mad, which is totally Funhouse. I've been through this, which is one of the most divisive adventures ever written. It's Castle Grayhawk, which is a classic Funhouse dungeon. My friends and I played through it. We had a blast. Again, we made characters expressly for this. I remember when I was spending my starting gold, I bought chalk. I didn't tell the players why, and my friends thought, oh, he's going to use it to mark the dungeon, but that's not what I did with it. Every time we killed somebody, I drew a chalk outline around them. I don't know why, but one of the other players thought that was hysterical. People were pissed when this came out because it is a Funhouse dungeon. It is expressly comedic in a way even White Plume Mountain isn't. And people wanted Castle Grayhawk, but they didn't want this Castle Grayhawk. They wanted Gary Gygax's original dungeon that he had worked on for like 20 years. It was huge. It was dynamic. Every time he had a new group of players, he would run them through Castle Grayhawk, and it changed based on what the last group of players had done. And we've never really gotten a finished version of it. There have been various different takes on it that people have done, but my friends and I played through this and we had a blast. But like I said, we made characters expressly for that purpose. D&D doesn't have to be, nor should it be exclusively serious people having serious fun. It can be lighthearted and goofy and have all sorts of, fourth wall breaking moments. We'll probably do more short videos. Maybe the next one will be on Birthright, and we'll talk about what I liked about that campaign setting in the next couple of weeks, because I want to get the Stronghold Rules done, so that's where my spare time is going right now. Another thing I'd like to do is just focus on Kickstarter stuff that I have found online that people have sent me to, and we're going to start with this, which is a product that's currently on Kickstarter, I think for about another week. So we don't have a lot of time, but this is something it's related to something I said we need more of, which is lots of short dynamic pieces of content we can drop into 5th edition, but it's actually from somebody I know. I know the guy that designed this. He is someone I have worked with. His name's Doug's son. And funnily enough, if you remember my second politics video where we talked about On the Origins of War and the Preservation of Peace by Donald Kagan, one of the things I know about Doug is he was a student of Don Kagan's at Yale. Doug's a great guy and he's a good designer, and he and I have worked together on D&D stuff in the past, so I haven't looked at this because it's not done, but I trust Doug to make good content. If you want to see more good third-party content that is short and digestible stuff, give it a shot. I'll put a link to Doug's Kickstarter in the doobly-doo, and by all means, if you've seen D&D content on Kickstarter that you think is good, let me know in the blah blah. People ask me occasionally where I got doobly-doo and blah blah. They are official YouTube terms. When you sign up for YouTube to make D&D content, they tell you have to call them that. It sounds like I'm making that up, but I am not. That's it, folks. Short video. Next time we see each other, we'll probably talk about a campaign setting. We will eventually get back to politics. I do want to do the 4th edition video. In the meantime, I'm heads down on the Stronghold stuff. If you want to help support the channel, as you know, I don't have a Patreon. I don't have ads in front of my D&D content, but I am an independent fantasy author. I write fantasy novels in my spare time. There's a link to my Amazon page in the doobly-doo. Come check it out. I've got 2 books up there. I'm working on my 3rd, and people seem to like them. The more books I sell, the more videos I want to make, and the more videos I make, the more books I sell. So there's this great ecology forming. Next time, I think we'll talk about Birthright or maybe 4th edition. Let me know what you want to see in the blah blah down below. Until next time, peace out.